We have a city council that has been pretty set on the steel-on-steel rail system that is going to be going through in Honolulu, possibly. And we've had on our show various people talking about all different kinds of issues surrounding the rail, people challenging whether the project should be done or not. Well, today we have a city council member, one of the 9, who is not exactly happy with what the city's doing in terms of the steel-on-steel rail. We want to talk to him about what his ideas are for the future of Honolulu transportation. I want to welcome Tom Berg.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Thank you, yeah. So you're one of the newer members of the city on the city council.
Finishing off Councilman Tatapoa resigned, finishing off his 2-year term.
And you represent the area that is impacted by the rail.
Yeah, Eva Beach to Kaena Point.
Right, right. And so basically tell me about, why are you concerned about the steel-on-steel rail project?
You mean this iron horse, noisy behemoth that belongs in the Smithsonian?
I can see you have strong opinions.
Back in '05 when the state legislature passed House Bill 1309, which became Act 247.
That was to fund the rail. That was the tax increase.
GET, and there was some fine print in there. And it said you can have anything that you need to resolve your transportation woes, except if you live on Oahu, you can't have highway technology. So most people not reading the fine print were told when they had scoping meetings, well, we can have a reversible expressway, managed lane, bus rapid transit. None of those options were actually doable. They were prohibited by law. So in this whole discussion, how steel wheeled on steel rail came about. I think back in '05, folks thought they were going to get 21st century technology, monorail, magnetic levitation, and it turned out that they were disqualified, not thoroughly analyzed for their superiority in price and energy use and the blight on the landscape. And most importantly, I think for our citizenry, is noise. And that was overlooked. Steel on steel is a screeching wheel.
Right, okay, and we've had, for example, Cliff Slater, HonoluluTraffic.com, Judge Walter Heen, who's suing to stop the project altogether. They have concerns about the environment, how it's going to impact the environment, how it's going to look in town, how it's going to impact, the Hawaiian culture, and so there's lots of different issues, the cost, and let's talk a little bit about the cost. Right now, the city's saying it's $5.3 billion to build this rail for 20 miles.
21 stations.
21 stations from Kapolei to Ala Moana.
Right.
Now, tell me about this next part, because ultimately they want to continue this rail until the University of Hawaii.
If I can just back up a little bit.
Sure.
I never thought the voter in '08 knew that there would be well over $1 billion in floating bonds. We pay the interest over 4% on that. I don't remember that in the mix. Also, when we look at these costs, it was sold to us that rail was going from a cornfield in Kapolei to the job centers of Waikiki and UH Manoa. And I've asked many, can you tell me what rail will look like over University, over the H1 on University, way up in the sky? And I don't think you can find a visual of that. So what happened was there's this 20-mile segment. The price tag now is $5.13 billion, something like that.
And when we voted on it in 2008,
$3.7 billion
really
in $08.
Right, $3.7 billion.
In $08.
Right.
And that's more, see, all this is confusing stuff. I call it bait and switch, lost leader. It's to get you in the store. So I went to one of the Honolulu Authority for Rapid Transportation. They were at Kapolei Hale a couple weeks ago. And I started asking questions. Most folks didn't know if there would be restrooms available at the 21 stations.
And there's not.
And there's not. A lot of folks had questions. One of them that I predominantly asked was, what's it going to cost to finish this to the 34-mile segment to UH Manoa and through Waikiki? $3.7 billion additional. That means another 15-year GET tax of a surcharge to the year 2037. So over the 30 years, that's $27,000 out of every family of 4 household that they're paying in an additional GET tax increase. As you may know, I proposed something to make a statement at City Hall, and I proposed a GET tax the same they did for rail, for highway technology, and for bicycle lanes, to make my point that we have a study to study bike lanes. There's nothing really happening. And that when you tell folks, do you want to expedite road construction? Absolutely. And you say, are you willing to pay a GET tax surcharge to get the roads built? No. So if people really looked at rail being a 30-year tax, $27,000 out of an average family of 4 out of their pockets, I don't think this rail would have advanced. That's what brings me to other types of rail technologies where you can get a public-private partnership, need not have to rely on the public sector financing it. There's better options out there.
Okay, now one of the things that happened the other night was, I'll bring up another council member that was at a neighborhood board meeting, Stanley Chang.
Yes.
And he was at the Holiday Neighborhood Board, and he admitted there that the city council members all know that this is not going to improve traffic. He said this is not about traffic. This is not going to improve any traffic for the people driving to in from Kapolei to town or from town back to Kapolei during the traffic time. Basically, it's going to be a way for people to get on a rail system and get out of the traffic themselves, but for the drivers, you know, it's not going to lessen traffic. Now, we heard from people at all levels of government when this was sold to the public that this was going to ease the traffic burden of the people coming from Kapolei, and that, you know, these poor people are stuck in traffic, which they are, for hours a day. So what is your thought? Do you think that the city council members really believe that this will not improve traffic, yet they support it?
Well, again, if the whole gamut were brought forward, and if it were a Thanksgiving meal and all the fixins and everything was on the plate, and we all gathered and broke bread together, and we could see everything from end of the table to the end of the table, what we got was little bits and pieces. So if we look at the traffic relief as the solution, the impetus for this was for traffic relief. Now we find it's for jobs, but the jobs are going to the Italian company and to build the rail cars in California, so we're not getting jobs locally. But predominantly, this whole thing for relieving traffic, we wanted an alternative. However, I think people realize that goods, services, and freight does not get served. And in Eva Beach, our neighborhood board, when we compared everything, we did not support steel wheel. What we looked at was emergency. When you have one way in and one way out, that's the first thing on your mind, is that when the tsunami sirens sound off and you have to evacuate, the rail of an elevated fixed guideway shuts down, doesn't move anything, doesn't get toilet paper, doesn't get water, doesn't get your batteries, doesn't get the fire department or anybody from one place to the next. So when we had the Black Tuesday where someone ran into that overpass on the H1, that was an example of what it would be like where our own emergency service providers couldn't mobilize. So that's a very important factor that people left out. It's not just transportation traffic relief, it's goods, services, and freight are not getting any relief. So we know that the 2035, the Oahu Regional Transportation Plan has always said, you know, if you continue to build out West Oahu and other factors, the level of service on the H1 will still be at a level F. So rail, and if I can add this, again, putting everything on the table, when we digest this thing, there are less than 2,000 parking stalls to serve all of West Oahu. So each council district has about approximately 100,000. Well, for all of West Oahu that I represent, let's say 100,000 folks, there's only 2,000 parking stalls, actually about 1,600. So if we're going to forfeit our cars, there's where you hear the Dr. Panos Prevaderos and others that will tell you, at best, rail in full operation will remove 1 to 3% of the cars off the road. Heck, if we just got the uninsured motorists off the road, no construction headaches, no tax increases, we can get 2 out of 10 off the road overnight. There's a better solution.
So, okay, so, you know, it's not going to relieve traffic. It's not really going to bring jobs because like you said, they're coming from out of state. So what do you think is driving the mayor, the last mayor, the council? Why do you think they're so on board for this rail? What is it behind this? I'm still trying to dig into this mystery.
It's many little things, and they all add up. For instance, the award to Ansaldo is $234 million more than Bombardier, the Canadian company. Why would the city be advocating to go with? They could have disqualified Ansaldo on the fact that they weren't registered in the state of Hawaii to do business. They could have said a technicality like they dismissed Bombardier. But instead, they did everything to protect. And so the good question, why? Well, one of the votes I took at the city council was an 8-1. You know, I was the only one that voted against Bill 40 on the bonds. But art and transit, 21 rail stations. They're to spend our tax dollars, $200,000 per station. There's money to be made there. I proposed my own floor amendment and said, we got schools, we got students with talent, we got universities. Why don't we put their art in the transit stations for free?
Right.
Bank that $4 million, let it garner interest, and we can go from there. But the whole thrust is to spend money with a fallacy. What bothers me on this is anytime that you mention federal dollars, the assumption is it's free. It's not my tax dollars. But that's just not true.
Well, one of the issues too is how much are we really going to get from the federal government? Because we had Senator Inouye from him on down, people pledging that they're going to bring in the bacon, they're going to bring in this money for the rail. I think it started off being $1 million, and now it's up to $1.5 million that we're going to get. Well,
but $1.5 billion.
$1 billion
right.
across. So when we're looking at this $1.5 billion, is that really even realistic compared to what some other cities are getting?
No, it's not realistic. There's been some other good ventures, like we were discussing earlier. There's something called Tiger Funds, and that was University of California in Pennsylvania. They were just looking at $40 million, and that was to advance the magnetic levitation technology. We have found that there's been other cuts. If I can go back, when I went to that HART meeting in Kapolei-Hale, it was of the $3.7 billion additional to make a totality of $9 billion to build a 34-mile segment, $9 billion. The $1.55 billion subsidy that you mentioned only covers the 20-mile segment. So we would have to broker and hope for that to actually make rail viable, to go to Waikiki of the job centers, UH Manoa, is that to get that extra $3.7 billion off the backs of the taxpayer and get some federal subsidy, we have to start from scratch. There's nothing in the bank. There's nothing available for that to go forward. That's why Dr. Panos Prevederos keeps saying, why are we going with something that is funded less than 20%? If it were highway technology, the feds do highways. They give us an 80% subsidy. So the state only would kick in its share, or the city 20%. We have flipped it. We have completely gone the opposite direction.
Right. So, okay, so we're looking at this lawsuit.
Yes.
And have had, like I mentioned, Cliff Slater, Panos Prevederos, Randy Roth, and Panos isn't involved in the lawsuit, but Randy Roth, Judge Heen, have been on the show. They've talked about why they filed this lawsuit to have the environmental impact statement redone and look at other options fairly, because they believe it's been slanted. And see, what else is out there. Now, what do you think about the lawsuit? What do you think about the EIS?
I concur. From day one, at the 11th hour, the Pearl Harbor emphasis was of party to the H1 corridor back in 04 and 05. So when they did the ORTP 2030, it was inclusive. Mayor Hanneman dismissed. Brisbane, Australia is building an underwater tunnel, today's dollars, for $1 billion per mile underwater. If we were to build a tunnel from Eva Beach to the airport, for instance, it would be actually less than this steel wheel on steel rail endeavor. But it wasn't allowed in the alternative analysis. It was nixed. It was the 11th hour, without a public hearing. We had public hearings. We had the OMPO-CAC and the policy meetings and all these other procedures to put it on for discussion, and it was removed. If I can add, I think the biggest travesty, again, was Act 247 in 2005 that prohibited us from examining true transportation traffic relief, because we all know in this town, when Mayor Harris did the same examination with the rail, the bus beats rail hands down.
Right, and that's one of the things that Cliff Slater brought up on the show that when he was on, actually, we filmed it before you were here. And one of the things he said is if you take the express bus from Kapolei into town on the express lane, which you're allowed to do, it takes 50 minutes. If you take the rail from the same place into town, it takes 51 minutes. So it's actually 1 minute, and it's always going to be 51 minutes. So,
well, we've also heard, if I can interject, if it were at grade, if it were at its surface, the noise factor is cut down immensely. The ground absorbs a lot of the sound of the noise. But more importantly, we've heard the architects come forward with about a price tag of half the price of the elevated fixed guideway with their own plan.
Right.
When they told me as a council person, if we actually did this endeavor, it would add some 10 minutes onto your trip. Do you think 10 minutes onto your trip? That's just another section on the newspaper, maybe another sip of coffee. Right. If you think about it, to save a couple $2 billion, we got sewer upgrades to deal with. We got a lot of other issues that need our attention. And you know, if we think we can just keep throwing money at the steel wheel on steel rail, that's where I want to go back. And I concur with this lawsuit. I concur with its findings. I do believe, because I've offered this at the City Hall, I've actually introduced, knowing I think they're going to be right. I'm trying to get the lawyers out of the trough. I don't want them feeding at the public trough. I don't like to see lawyers make money off of our hard-earned dollars. And I want to end this lawsuit. So I've said, hey, I think they're going to win. I think that this EIS wasn't done fairly or correctly. And when they fully analyze this thing, why don't we start over now? Because we're not going to get those federal funds, right, until October, November of 2012. So it takes about 9 months to do an EIS all over again from scratch. By the time if we started now to the time we completed it, we still wouldn't have those federal dollars anyhow. Right. So it would make sense to, rather than litigate this and know the outcome. You know, I'm not of Hawaiian ancestry, but the first day on the city council, I think it was January 26th of this year, we had to do the SMA for the approval to do the 4 segments of rail. And I was so saddened that for those Native Hawaiians that know of a burial grounds, that they were going to plow through this thing. And I says, wait a minute. If this was a colonial headstone, gravestone markers, no way would you plow a rail through someone's cemetery. Because it's below ground and you don't have headstone markers, what gives you the right to go ahead and say, you know, hey, I'll do it at the last minute? We all know at the last minute it's not going to change its course. So I was advocating that to do your due diligence, and that's one of the other aspects of this lawsuit, not only the historical aspect of going through a historic district, but the lack of all the progressions we've made as a country to give finally respect for the indigenous cultures in our United States, to go backwards, to actually say, well, you know, the courts have looked at this and you can piecemeal this project. It's okay if you run through at the last minute, you find a solution. Well, when those pillars go in, it's not just a pillar in the earth. There's a complete support network, very intrusive, that has to go in the ground. So
8-foot pillars.
Oh.
Concrete, right? Elevated, steel on steel. So
yeah.
It's hard to imagine, to visualize, but... You
know, Malia, can I add this? I found something else very important for the viewers to know. I've been advocating to remove the landfill out on the leeward coast. I find that is another breach, a broken treaty. Well, it turns out that the only place PVT Land LTD, the PVT Land Company, the landfill, privately owned, is the only repository, I don't know what you would call it, depository, for the rail debris, construction debris. The only place. So I've asked the city, can you tell me your findings? Can you gauge? Can you give me the capacity? Can you tell me how much, with the eminent domain, condemnation, warehouses being torn up, all the things that you have to do, you can have a lot of construction debris. We in the Waianae Coast, we don't get rail. We don't get nothing out of this rail, but you're going to dump all the gobbledygook in our backyard. No tipping fee, no benefit package, nothing coming to the residents to compensate the residents, but yet the garbage. And then what's really strange about this is that Mayor Hanneman, right before he left office, took 50 acres from PVT to make a park in Nanakuli. Well, if the only landfill on the island of Oahu who can take the rail garbage loses its 50 acres, they close shop in 8 years. Where's the waste going to go? So this is gross negligence. So I know that's not a party to the lawsuit, but I have found just one more little facet there.
There's all kinds of twists and turns in this story, huh?
Yes, yes.
Another issue was electricity as well. How are we going to power this thing? And you know, you have one side saying it's green and the other side saying no, it's not green. There's a lot more alternatives in terms of cars and buses that are, you know, more environmentally friendly.
Throw ridership in there. Throw it all in there. The numbers are skewed. I've had a couple town hall meetings. Dr. Pravaderos came to one of them, and the theme was numbers don't lie. People do.
Right. Okay, now one of the ideas is if you actually do get to do this EIS again, what are some of the ideas that you'd want to bring in terms of technology? You have a video to show us, but tell me what you're going to show us first.
Well, I did have a town hall meeting at the end of August, and I brought 2 folks in with their own time, no connections, just want to do what's right. And one of them was Gig Greenwood, and he's been a fan of monorail. And the other was Frank Gennardio. He has been examining the magnetic levitation. And they said, look, public-private partnership, It's quieter, less expensive, less energy use, less blight on the landscape, the way to go. And at this town hall meeting I had a lot of anti-rail people show up. They actually were convinced, walked out of that room, knowing that there was a better product out there and would like another stab at this.
Besides the steel on steel elevated system.
Hey, folks that don't want steel on steel, don't want rail at all, when they saw that there was a better way, and then we looked at why were they disqualified? Why were they not fully vetted? Why this, why that? And we're finding answers. This whole steel wheel on steel rail was a fixed fight from day one.
Oh,
and
absolutely,
and
yes.
at our
No,
expense.
everybody knows that.
Do you want to? This is.
I think even the proponents know that.
There is an endeavor. This is American-made, American technology, American-owned, American entrepreneurship, utilizing the maglev technology, by the way, which is in Japan. South Korea just had a symposium this past week. It's in Germany and China. There's actually more builders of maglev than this steel wheel on steel rail, the three bidders. We've got Sumitomo, Bombardier, and Ansaldo.
Ansaldo, yeah.
So there's actually more in the business of magnetic levitation, but the city dismissed it, saying it's proprietary. You can only get one-stop shop with Japan, and that's just not truthful information. This proves it. This shows something that would be better for our environment, our landscape in Honolulu. If I can play.
Sure, go ahead.
Let's
Population grows, our cities continue to expand, devouring more and more landmass. Our solution has been to construct additional highways, but the results are no longer meeting our economic and environmental needs. Cities have begun to explore magnetic levitation as a realistic urban transportation option. A maglev vehicle can maneuver through buildings, above crowded city streets, and through public parks. General Atomics and its team members are developing a totally passive, permanent magnet large air gap system, which results in lighter vehicles, reduced energy consumption, and more streamlined, less costly guideway structures. A linear synchronous motor, or LSM, provides propulsion. It is housed in the guideway rather than in the vehicle. The system uses neodymium iron boron permanent magnets placed in a configuration called a Halbach array. This yields a very high lift-to-drag ratio and leads to an efficient levitation and propulsion system. General Atomics, the team leader, has a 50-year history in the development and manufacturing of cutting-edge products, such as the Predator family of UAVs. Other team member companies and institutions were chosen for expertise in their given fields. The General Atomics team has been developing and testing the maglev concept since 1992. A full-sized maglev chassis is being tested on a 400-foot test track at GA headquarters in San Diego, California. The team plans to construct a demonstration facility at California University of Pennsylvania, which will connect its stadium with student housing, parking, a convocation facility, and other areas. It will serve the dual purpose of demonstrating the maglev technology and fulfilling a transportation need. Already, the future of the urban maglev is taking shape, with major cities, national parks, and universities across America expressing interest in the system. A truly innovative type of urban mass transportation for the United States, made in the United States, is moving closer to realization.
I'm pretty sure I've seen that in the Batman movie.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty high tech.
21st century technology, American made, right
So
here.
how long has it, just speaking of like new technology, how long has it been since a steel on steel rail was built in America? Do you know?
Well, this is why I'm having a town hall meeting on December 6th, if this still airs before that, at Mission Memorial Auditorium.
It will, yes.
To help, I'm bringing, everyone on both sides of the aisle here to come in on this rail project to discuss. We can't even determine if we're getting light or heavy rail. So the definition of light versus heavy, there hasn't been a heavy rail, technically, heavy rail, built in the United States in the last 30 years.
30 years, and this is kind of the future technology coming out, huh?
You
So
know,
we're kind of doing something that's been done 3 decades ago rather than
You mean
the
3
future.
centuries ago?
3 centuries ago. I mean.
Centuries ago.
Yeah, right. So what, if you want to sum it up, we only have a couple minutes left on the show. What are your final thoughts on this this whole project? Where you see it going? How you seen this play out?
Hail Mary.
The
It's
Hail
fourth
Mary.
down.
Yeah.
And we're down by a score, and we got to get in the end zone. There are folks that are, let's look at the other side of the coin here. There are those that really believe in this project. There are those that think that this is the solution, live, work, and play, that they're going to forfeit their vehicles and they're going to ride this and use this as their choice of commuting. Let's look at their world for a minute here. This opportunity that I'm bringing forward is not to derail that. It's not to stop that. It's the same jobs will be there, getting folks off the bench. It's just the taxpayer is going to save some money. I think it's a win-win that we truly look again at the new technologies, because 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when they were looking at all the different analysis of what's out there, it has changed. And so we now have China doing magnetic levitation. We have Germany doing it. We have South Korea just had a symposium on it. They're doing it. We got 2 states that have been approved by the federal government, Pennsylvania and Colorado. And as you saw in the video, San Diego's had this out there for 20 years saying,
Right.
Hello.
Yeah. So there's lots of options out there.
Yeah.
They basically the opponents and you've mentioned today that the EIS hasn't really been necessarily done fairly, and there's lots of other possibilities for Honolulu. So let's look at those.
Please.
So we'll have to see what happens with that, and you'll keep plugging along in the council, huh?
Yeah. 8 to 1, 8 to 1,
8 to 1, 8 to 1. We'll have to see. As Governor Abercrombie said recently, we're in a football game, and we're in the first quarter, but this is actually more like the fourth quarter. So we'll see. The momentum's been with the proponents throughout this, but now there's a chance that things could swing with this lawsuit, and let's start the whole process again. So we'll see.
I appreciate that.
Right. Well, thank you for coming on the show. We'll have to have you on again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and good luck to you in the council.
Thank you, Malia.
This has been News Behind the News. Thank you for joining us today. Aloha.